Hello once again everyone, and today we have a special request actually from a viewer of our channel. So we're going to be dipping back into English Longsword very briefly. What this is the viewer in question is working on a project, and they wanted to get some reference images of me doing some of the guards. They've been actually using me for a reference, so I figured, hey, that sounds fun, let's do that. But as well, let's also just talk about some of the lines in English Longsword. Now, I have a link down to the video that I was sent, which is actually by our special request, Artis Miotorum. And so you can go look at that yourself. All this is the way I take the guards, and I'm going to talk about kind of this basic little set of 7 guards you should have for Longsword period, what you do with them, why you might do one version versus the other, and things like that. So kind of a talky vid with a lot of me standing around at a like climb. So, starting off nice and simple, you've got your high guard, right? Your cutting guard from which you can send your hawks, all that sort of thing. What you're looking for is up above the head. Now, you'll see different versions of this. You'll see more elbows forward. You'll see this side open, and that's really the big question is, are you going to open your backside or are you going to close your backside? It doesn't necessarily matter all that much. By being more open, you'll also notice from the front that makes me a lot more linear. I get a bit more power, not quite a volta, but it's that deepening effect, versus being more square, gives me a lot more reach and a lot more presence in my cut. When I'm focused on a very narrow cut, like I'm test cutting, I like to be here. If I'm worried more about just covering ground, then I'll let myself open, and that will make things flow a little bit better. But taking a couple of those, let's start off this way. Just bring the sword up above your head. It should be so if you pull it down, it's touching your forehead. Nice, good bend. 45 degrees of what we're looking at. Posture's nice and upright. And the sword should be kind of back, so it's over your head, not in front where you're going to lose your hands. And not dripping down where you're going to end up lumberjacking it. Just right here. And if you need to, you could also try opening up. And you notice I also open up my back foot with it as well. Not that you have to, but you might as well tie the elbow and the shoe tip together. And here's that from the front. Squared. Open. And so there's your high guard. What do you do with your high guard? You're going to cut a lot. Now, I encourage people, I've talked about this before at length, I encourage more people to take these high guards. You don't see them a ton because people hand snipe, because people are trying to control their cuts and they haven't practiced them a lot, what have you. And don't get me wrong, being up here does mean your cut's going to come down with a little bit more force, but you also don't have to add anything to it. If you're up here, just ask it to go forward, cut for the head, and anyone who wants to keep their head will be lifting their sword up to deal with it. So anytime you are seeing a low guard, be attacking from here. But I digress. Our next 2 guards are going to be our inside and outside, our shoulders, basically. So this actually kind of perfectly mirrors sword and buckler, which we kind of got 2nd, 3rd, 4th. But that's going to be on the right shoulder first for our outside. As far as putting it on the right shoulder, let's talk about a couple niche things. Right shoulder is a pretty nebulous term. So you'll see things that resemble postidona soprana, right, or even just a deep postidona. You'll also see this kind of half turn, though there's no guarantee as to whether or not that's an intentional turn of the torso or just lack of depth perception in medieval artwork. It happens. And then of course you'll see more modernly a lot of people standing squarely. My assumption is that generally speaking, and what I fight out of is I fight between one of these 2. If I'm taking this, I'm really taking more like this anyway, so we're going to set that aside for now. Instead, being square like this, the benefit is it's very easy to move into. Just bring your hands up and forward and you're ready to cut. The downside of it is that it's very closed off. By being super small and square here, and I don't want to sit here for very long, I'm kind of pigeonholing myself. By letting that back shoulder open a little bit, kind of letting the sword slightly drip behind me, 1, I'm actually taking my hands out as a target. If I'm wearing parts of armor, I just closed off that lead target that you might cut for. And 2, just like with a volta, I'm now getting that little bit of turn in behind my cut. It's not a ton, but it is just a little bit that can sometimes save you. Just make sure you're cutting from turning, not nebulously out into space. So, going through that again, my outside guard. Its most square form, deepening it. You notice my foot can still play forward here. You could open it, but that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good, so just keep them nice and square. And then, facing the front, nice and next to me, nice and open. Now, as far as your left shoulder, and I have very particular opinions about this, I like sweeping up into the left shoulder, but I'm never going to fight out of it as my first choice. So, like I described in the very first video of The Man That Will, I don't cut from my left first, ever. And the reason for that is because if I'm sitting over here, it's a not optimal guard compared to literally everything else I can do. Not to mention if I do need to cut from my left, I just didn't. Instead, most of your strong actions from your right side will bring you into some form of left guard, and in particular, if you're trying to avoid getting stuck low and giving openings to people standing like this, getting used to cutting and folding into that left shoulder becomes something very beneficial. So, a couple different versions of our inside guard, or our left shoulder. Number one, right foot forward with it. Number two, don't be here. Being closed off is just going to ensure that you're non-optimal in pretty much everything you do. You're only going to hang out here for a brief moment, so you don't need to be square and solid like we were the first time. Instead, at my most narrow, it's generally speaking relatively still far tilted back, which again, I'm wearing armor, close things off. If someone's trying to hand snipe me, you notice my hands are a lot more prominent in this. Keeps them close, gets that turn going, and inclines for me to move. I don't want to sit here. I've already got juice, and I'm ready to utilize it on my next hawk. Alternatively, you can really turn it back and also let that body turn back too. So, showing this way now, my options are turned or fully turned. And it's just a question of those feet, really, and a little bit of hands. From the front one more time, turned, fully turned. And there's nothing saying you can't move between those as you do it. For example, there's a moment when, if I, for example, do a soldani or an unterhau, boom, I fold into it, but also just briefly during that cut, I was here first before I decided to let my feet move, and you may or may not choose to do so. Comboing between these is super easy. Of course, you're in the right shoulder, with a hawk, or with a round beef or something along those lines, if you want to start getting into the high line, or round, as I was corrected. Point being, those are all your uppercuts, right? I want to cut any direction, I hold from above, send my hawk out. I would like to cut more specifically playing those 45s. I go to the appropriate shoulder. My preference is my right one. Okay, cool. So now let's talk about our threatening guard, or some people in the English Longsword rabbit hole have been calling it the roebuck, which basically means like stag, essentially. This is your ox guard, basically, or finestra. Now, important differentiation in the way I will take it versus others. I'm not doing a thumb grip with this one. I'll explain why more when I get to our pendant guard, or pendulum guard. This one I like to keep edge up. I like to keep my elbows nice and back, and the reason for that is I want to be more easily able to transition into my high guard or into my shoulder. If I'm in a thumb grip, to do that requires me to add that little bit of extra movement to get out of it, and I don't want that. Plus, as I've talked about before, until I am explicitly told to do so, I'm not going to be doing thumb grip cuts with my English longsword interpretations. I'm going to keep it all orthodox grip. Now, all that is just making sure you're supporting your feet as you take a cross hands guard on your right side. Make sure it's not too far forward, not too far backward, just nice and strong, standing squarely. You'll see a couple different versions of my foot here. If I'm being aggressive, then I'll keep my hips square because I really want to turn this over and fire out. That'll be more like a half hawk or a quarter hawk. Or actually it would be a quarter blow in the way I did originally. Or alternatively, you can file a foin, which is a thrust. So pretty straightforward. The more square my hips are, the easier it is for me to launch that. Alternatively though, especially if I'm just taking it for a moment, so maybe I just cut, I'll let that hip open. This also ensures if I then need to spring this way, I'm a small turn away with my lead foot from moving such a way. So if I'm on the attack, square, I'm gonna sit here for a minute, right angle. So here's that for a moment. Square, right angle, square, right angle. I'm gonna make sure that's a nice 45, not curled in or anything along those lines, just good and strong. If you need to, you can extend it, or you can keep it relatively. Since I'm thinking about thrust, I'm letting my right hand be a little more compressed than I normally would. If I'm thinking about a block, it's a lot more up here. But anyway, now we get to our pendant, or pendulum guard. Basically, it's our hanger. Now this is where I will put a thumb grip on because of the purpose of it. So, again, link in the video down below if you want to read the actual compiled text. I'm not the one doing this research. This guard is described as an older style guard. We'll get to the guards that they encourage later, but basically it's meant to be a universal defense. And I 100% agree with it, which is why I'm taking it the way I'm about to. So what it is it's just a hanging point, right? So if I'm here, I can very easily defend myself against anything coming from above, and I can thrust. However, if I need to just worry about universal defense, I'm just trying to get out of dodge, then there's no better guard than something that drips. However, while I could absolutely do it on my right side, and you'll again see people do this with the thumb grip, I don't like retreating this way. Pretty much all of my game plan becomes enter from my right, do actions from my strong side, and then exit out to the left, either by completing a triangle step and then retreating, or just stepping on this line and then retreating. So as many steps back homewards, right? So with that in mind, I would actually prefer to take this guard right foot forward. So my pendant is going to look like this. I will go ahead and put the thumb on the blade since it's a little more defensive. Here's why. So I let my tip hover about, it feels from my perspective like it's at the bottom of my ribs. The actual image may show it a little bit lower. The reason I'm going for that thumb on the blade is because I want this to be a big shock absorber. If anything does come down, it's just going to slide off. And also, I'm not looking to thumb cut here. I'm looking to have those edges in line for more evenly pushing things away. Basically, if you've never had someone really try to hit you with longsword, you're pairing with the flat, they're going to be able to move through it. Edge, they don't. If I'm worried about defending the universal way, so anything coming in from any direction, having those edges on this plane makes that significantly easier. I can defend myself with just a small turn of my hands, which is just using this like a big rudder. You can do the same on here, but I already talked about the retreating properties. The other benefit of having this on my left side is that if something suddenly gets close, this can snap to any direction I need it to and cover that line very quickly. Now part of this is also my game plan. I just started with the KDF. Flug is taken like this on this side. Ox was taken a lot like this. So it's a very familiar position to me. However, everything I said still works if you do want to take it this way, but if I'm going to make the choice for my optimal retreating guard, I'm going to go ahead and put the thumb on there just for that extra security. I'm not trying to bounce back afterwards. I'm not going to riposte or redouble. I'm just going to defend myself as I leave. So, taking that guard now, hanging down, and again you can adjust depending upon where you need to be, and taking forward. Now, next we get into our stop guards, or the medium guards, of which there are two. Your left foot is forward, and you can either have it in front of your right hip or your left hip. Now I'm very particular about these because these are the ones that I probably use the most. So those of you that may have watched my sparring footage or sparred against me will know I like to enter in with essentially posto breve, or short point. The reason I like to do this is because it's very easy for me to play various games. I get to keep my right foot loaded so I can do all the things I want to do. It doesn't really cost me anything to stand here. So this is kind of my entering guard. This means, though, that I can very easily threaten a thrust quite strongly, or alternatively, I may need to quickly defend this side. So this motion of bouncing between the two and kind of treating them almost as like one guard in three is the same thing we did up here. If this was all cuts, 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 right, but then with more optimal versions, this is all my thrusts, but then with two more optimal sides. So, against the right hip, again, both hips nice and forward, or if you want to be more defensive, you can sink into it, but I'm going to keep these as offensive guards. I turn those wrists out so that they're a nice 45 so I don't lose my hands, and that ensures that then when I push inward, I'll get that quarter turn that I need to set aside any thrust. If I have it in front of my left hip, almost kind of like one of the side sword versions of Iron Gate that you'll see later. This one is more about I'm just locking out this whole side. This could be more toward middle, but we'll put it right in front of my hip bone for now. It does the exact same thing. I'm going to thrust across or even just straight in. So here's both of those from the front again. In front of my left hip, in front of my right hip, then from the side, in front of my left hip, in front of my right hip, another way, in front of my left hip, in front of my right hip. And you could, if you wanted to, open this up if you need to be stable on the right side. I wouldn't do that here, but if you need to sit here for a minute, just like with the ox or the roebuck earlier, you can turn that out. So, pretty straightforward, leads to thrust, defends you, great. So then, great, wonderful. We've got the majority of our guards, there's one left, and it's going to be literally Iron Gate. It's described as an entering guard, a thing you can do a lot, and I also use this quite a bit. Just going to be straight up like Porta di Ferro, so my left foot is forward, and my sword is hanging between my legs, essentially. You will see sometimes it drifts further back with things like that. I, however, like to keep it out in front of me, and I'll describe why in a moment. But this position, despite only really being given a ton of attention in the Fior di Battaglia, is a position I think all fencers should be taking. And the reason for this, regardless of tradition, regardless even of your intent, is because this is the easiest way for you to stand. Period. If I just hand you a sword and tell you to stand, this is where you're gonna go. This costs me nothing to hold. It tells my opponent nothing. And that's really the idea behind it, is this is for when I am inviting someone to attack. It's a very optimal version of a low guard. And on top of that as well, it's making sure that I am able to effectively cover from my strong side without me having the temptation to just throw my hands up there. And I said this was the last card, but there's actually one after. Sorry, I'm doing this off the fly. But, again, all that is just bring your hands down. I like to keep my tip in front because if my tip drifts, that means it's more time before it gets to the center. I want it to be relatively forward already, so at bare minimum, I can just lift my hands up and cover myself. You can also fire a sneaky little thrust from here. But, that is my Iron Gate, and then my Iron Gate from the left. Nice and straightforward. So now our actual final guard, that's going to be down here. This is Boar, referred to in the English sources, like Dente de Chingaro, like Alber. It's your low guard when you fire your dominant side Hawk. So all that's going to be is, again, I don't like to take this one left foot forward. Not that you won't end up here, and not that you couldn't call it Boar, but if you're here, you might as well turn off into Iron Gate. We're here, so I'll go ahead and leave my sword in the plane it was in. It should be lined up kind of vaguely with the left hip. Hip should be forward and engaged. I'll talk more about that in a second, but I just finished my full hawk. Here I am. Now I'm in Boar. Here's this from the side. Now if you want to, you can also turn out. Doesn't really get you a ton of benefit at first, but it will give you benefit if you need to step with it, or alternatively you need to step out with it. But I will be showing mine forward, because that's what I'm focusing on. So, with that in mind, that's the 7 lines of the longsword, at least as per speculative English longsword composition that we've all kind of been working on. I say I just am doing what I was shown. But the point of the matter is, all these positions and what you do from them really are your basic longsword playbook. So just to briefly go through them again, to show what you got. Okay, we need a strong attacking guard. Gravity has a 100% positive KD ratio. Okay, I need a guard for my right side. Gotcha, boss. I need a guard for my left side. I'm your man. Okay, I need a guard that threatens a thrust. Fantastic. I need a guard that defends everything on the high line and low line as I retreat. No problem. I need a guard that threatens on the low line or can stop things. Got 2 for you. Okay, what happens when I finish a cut? Where do I end up? I'm gonna be here. What about when I want to tell my opponent nothing or I cut from the other side? We'll be here for you. That's really all you need. 2 low guards, 2 medium-ish guards, 2 high guards, 1 defensive, 1 offensive, just because we're asymmetric, and then 3 cutting guards. That's about all you need. Anything more than that, you're just starting to get overly specific and or dealing with particular ranges or what have you. But if you're gonna fight from guards, this is really about all you need. So, otherwise though, thank you all very much for watching. Bit of a new kind of video. I'm going to try and be more regular about putting content up, so those of you waiting for Page, or those of you waiting for the Zettel, I will be getting back to that soon. But certainly, thank you all very, very much for watching, and I hope this was helpful for our requestee. We'll go over some other techniques another time.